pink horse?
Like at this point, I'm gonna concede, my friend.
Yeah, you ready to call it?
Ready to call it, yeah.
Nice one.
Big handshake.
Yeah. I am happy. Connor, tell us about why you just conceded.
It's just too much smite. I was a little burned out after all that smite. That was horrible. I think I would have done some things differently.
What up, everybody? It's George back again with Warp Charge Gaming. Excited to be here today to talk to you about the Thousand Suns tactics that I've came up with the post-spring FAQ from GW. What we've gained as Thousand Suns with our Brotherhood of Sorcery rule that comes with being a pure Thousand Suns attachment. Not only do we have +6 inches to the cast of our powers, but we also now can do smite unmodified, no +1 to the cast. You can see in the FAQ here how that is applied. You gain the Brotherhood of Sorcery for all Thousand Suns psykers when you are a pure detachment. So this led to me making a core backbone to several different lists that I'll go over here in a moment. A lot of details to cover on the evolution of thought. That's how these videos have been going. This is episode 2 of a tactics talk. The first one was Tau tactics, and I'm basically creating lists as I evolve my concepts per the next tournaments I'm going to go to or what I feel like running at any given time. If I go to an intense amount of research to evolve my thought in several playtesting games to create what I think is the most optimized, I am starting to make sure I collect that data as the process goes along so I can share it with you and show how my thoughts gone and hopefully gain insight from you as you might want to offer suggestions or maybe a twist on the thoughts that I'm presenting, or hopefully I'm helping you as well by gaining insight into and expediting your research process by compacting it all in this video. So let's dive in, right? So again, the backbone, Ahriman and 3000 Sun Demon Princes. The cool thing about 1000 Suns Demon Princes is that they can take 2 psychic powers. All other Demon Princes data sheets from all other books can only do 1. So that alone is a potency that is makes them one of the better options when it comes to the different Demon Princes you could choose from, not to mention a 4-up invuln, while the rest are 5s unless you take a Tzeentch Demon. So we got a 4-up invuln, we got 2 powers, and now with the Brotherhood of Sorcerer ability from Thousand Suns, we also have +6 inches to our range and on our psychic powers, and we can cast Smite without any +1. So that was a fundamental core of what I definitely was going to bring, Supreme Command Attachment, 3 Tsons, and an Ahriman. When making these different lists, the most important thing in this concept, as I was mentioning before, is the character rule. You have to be able to protect the psykers. If they can't get to your characters, then you're going to walk up the board and you're going to do 20+ mortal wounds a turn and eventually remove them. So with the character rule, not being able to target a character that's less than 10 wounds, the main idea is that the enemy can never get to these characters. So a big part of the foundation here of what the list concepts are about is how to keep those protected no matter what, pretty much infinitely, and at least by the time they're gone, it's the end of the game and you are in their field. An element of the list, when you have 3000 Sun Demon Princes plus Ahriman, Ahriman's no joke in combat either. He has, he's a 2-up to hit with a 3 damage weapon. Has decent strength, 12-inch move. He's no slouch, and him and 3 Demon Princes are a force to be reckoned with in itself. And even without all the smite, if you can protect that amount of close combat into their deployment zone, that alone can be the deciding factor. And so just by getting a delivery system for your potent close combat characters like Demon Princes, 2-ups, rerolling 1s to hit, strength 7 with 7 attacks from the Malefic Talons, 2 damage apiece, you can really wreck some things, especially in multitudes of Demon Princes. So a delivery system's half the battle, not counting about the amount of smite that you could throw out at the same time. So horrors have been the move for me for a long while, but again, this got increased in potency with the Warp Surge stratagem, giving +1 invuln, and on top of that, Pink Horrors gained so that when you have a unit above 20 models, or 20 models or above, then you gain +1 shot to your Iridescent Flames, I believe is the name. So they already had 2 shots apiece. Now you can get 3 shots apiece. So if you have a unit of 30 pink, which is your max squad, then that is 90 shots. The weapon of their that they shoot is based on user strength. They're strength 3 by default. You throw in a change caster, and now they get +1 strength, making them a 4. And then on top of that, you could go for a D3 result on the boon of change and potentially give them even another +1 strength, making them strength 5. Okay, so not only do you have 90 shots that can be easily user strength 4 by the change caster giving +1 strength, and on top of that, potentially strength 5 with the boon of change on a D3 result. Not only can you do that, but you can also use a psychic power called Flickering Flames that gives them +1 to wound in the shooting. So now you have 90 shots that are 4-ups to hit, rerolling 1s from a Demon Prince, and +1 to wound, strength 4 minimum. So against anything with strength 4, anything all the way up to strength 8, you would be a 4-up to wound, where usually you would be a 5. If you can get yourself to strength 5 with a boon of change, now all the way up to strength 10, or excuse me, toughness 10, you would then be able to wound on a 4. Everything's toughness 4, you're wounding on a 3. So this gets to be pretty awesome and can really put down what you're targeting. On top of that, they're just extremely survivable. They have a 4-up invuln, and then they can become a 3-up invuln with the stratagem. But even beyond that, with the proper amount of reinforcement points, the horde can almost never go away. If you want a singular unit that cannot be, nearly not be killed, you can do that with almost an endless supply, well, a limited supply by how many reinforcement points you put aside, but by splitting the pink horrors. For each pink that dies, you can split it into 2 blues, who then split into 2 brimstones, okay? So 1 pink horror and the 4 bodies that it can turn into account for 5 wounds. Technically, if you put enough reinforcement points to split the entire horde, you have the 30 plus 4 apiece for each one of them, so just 5 times 30, we're at 150 wounds that exist there if you take the proper amount of points. Now that's a chunky amount of points to dedicate, and that's where the balance and the list building and the play testing comes to try to figure out the perfect combination or the right amount of what's the minimum that you can take of the pink horrors and the reinforcement points required to be able to survive getting up the board with your close combat while smiting everything away. This can be, you know, usually the factor that would be a problem with the smite spam and even the close combat guys is a ton of bodies going against hordes. Those hordes, they would just, you know, soak up all those wounds. Eventually you would kill through them. Again, by turn 5 in a practice game that you can see below, I was able to do 150 wounds by turn 5, including the shooting from the horrors. And that's kind of the factor that helps you get through the screens there, is by having those 90 shots with +1 to wound, rerolling 1s, all that nature. So that's enough firepower included with the smite and included with the close combat. You're participating in all the phases. You're extremely powerful in one of them particularly. You have a ton of shots when it's not really what they're thinking about, when they're more thinking about close combat and psychic. It's effective. The thing that, so I built all of my first list around the idea of that there's going to be 30 pink horrors. What's the amount of reinforcement points needed to keep them alive as I move up the board, and 3 Tson Demon Princes with Ahriman. In the beginning, I started out with 2 battalions. And what I did at first is a 1,000 Suns battalion and a Demon battalion. So I had 3 units of cultists, 2 units of brimstones, and a 30-man squad with some reinforcement points. I wanted to take a bunch of, off the gates, I wanted to take a bunch of command points. There's a lot of stratagems that are useful. And I think that in most of my, in my Tau tactic video as well, as I prepared for a tournament upcoming, I did the same thing. I started out by taking a ton of command points and trying to use as much as I could, kind of finding out what works. And what I've found as I do several games in a row is that I need more. I want more of either smite or more reinforcement points, more bodies. I need more protection. I need a small beat stick, or I need something more than the command points. And so that's where I have most of my lists now evolved to a single battalion with detachments that only provide a single CP, if not a patrol, depending on what you're trying to incorporate into the list. And heck, maybe it's a fortification or a super heavy, like for instance Magnus, if I took a single super heavy detachment, which we'll get to. Magnus definitely becomes a factor in the decision making here. I've struggled with, over my list, including back when 8th edition first began and I was running my Malefic Lords, the Smite and the Horrors were the things that won the games for me. Even though, like, if you put Magnus in the list, there's an opportunity for him to die. Anything that's big above, you know, characters above, 10 wounds or whatever, big tank or a Lord of War, as cool as they are and as effective as they can be, they also can die extremely quickly. And most folks in a competitive environment are prepared to take one of these out, whether it's just several las cannons or their own super heavy. A lot of what people discuss is how going first is such a big factor in the 8th edition 40k, and you want to mitigate risk. You want to mitigate the gamble, right? So when you take the big guys, you know, they often get wrecked, and it's about being able to earn their points back before they die. And if they die on the first turn, that's not a very big likelihood. And at least if they do, you need to be prepared for being able to still play the game and successfully without that guy. So that is, for me, large characters, Fate Weaver, Scarbrand, you know, Magnus, Scalabrax, even though he's pretty solid with how much saves he had. Of course, now they've removed the double feel no pain concept. Anything that allows you to try to save an unsaved wound, a feel no pain, if you will, you cannot double up on anymore. No more can you take the warlord trait of a 6+ invuln or feel no pain and also have the default like disgustingly resilient and do double, right? Anyways, we'll get more to that, but you know, big guys in the list has always been something I've steered away from. I've found more effectiveness by taking more things that can hide, more characters. For instance, you know, Magnus at 450 points, that's more than 2 Demon Princes. And you know, 2 Demon Princes feels like it could be more effective than Magnus, particularly because it can't be targeted. But we'll talk more about him and what he can offer and why he might be the ticket, regardless of the factor that he could be taken out, right? You got to do a little bit of gambling. It is a dice game after all. So, double battalion, cultists, horrors, and the Tson Supreme Command Detachment. From there, it's about filling in the extra points with making sure your screen stays around and with reinforcement points for splits or for more summoning, and then more smite. So in the beginning, I tried to take as much as I could. I found that in pretty much all the different evolutions of lists I made, it was between 9 and 12 characters. Anytime you chose to make a few sacrifices, it typically only resulted in 1 to 2 smites going away. And often that was a decision that was tough because you wanted to take as much as possible and you know it's really strong, but you have to make sure that the balance exists to survive all coming situations. So as I was discussing, I've discovered that taking a bunch of command points can be a lustful thing. You get stars in your eyes and want to accomplish all the things, but again, if you don't have the appropriate units on the board to apply the stratagems to, then there's no point in having all of these anyways. Especially when circumstantially and majoritarily you're going to be using the same stuff regardless. And if you start to do the math on that and see how much it really requires you to use the main things that you want, you can see that the extracurricular ones you end up just doing because you have the CP to spend, and it doesn't really gain you as much as if you didn't pay the tax for those extra force orgs, like 3 cultists inside of a battalion, when I could just take a Supreme Command Attachment and just get the characters. I just want the smite, right? And a Supreme Command Attachment already has an elite slot where you can put a Zangor Shaman, for instance. So the different characters that I was applying for 1,000 Suns Brotherhood of Sorcerer rule to get as much smite as possible was, again, the Zangor Shamans, Sorcerers, and Exalted Sorcerers, mixed in with the Demon Princes and Magnus, Ahriman. So you could get 9 to 12 in a list and still have an appropriate screen. I started out with the horrors. I felt like that was one of the most survivable methodologies to being able to deliver my army to the forefront. So the second move after the double battalion, deciding that I wanted to have more offensive power, was to remove the tax of the 3 units of cultists and to fit in first Magnus. The idea was that Magnus gives a ton of extra utility to the 1,000 Suns, and he is extremely powerful in his own right. 18 wounds with a 4-up invuln by default, with several powers that can buff him. You can give him a 3+ invuln with the Weaver of Fates. You can give him -1 to hit with the Glamour of Tzeentch. And then on top of that, you can even heal him with the Temporal Manipulation by giving him plus D3 wounds back, and that's all psychic abilities. With your 1,000 Sun Demon Princes being able to do 2 powers apiece, plus Sorcerers being able to do 2 powers apiece, you're easily between 8 to 12 characters able to cover all of the different powers that you're able to utilize. Particularly in this case, the Heretic Astartes, the powers of change and the powers of Tzeentch. These are the 3 different disciplines that you're able to pull from. And amongst those 3 different disciplines, that pretty much covers 6 offensive powers other than smite. That would do, by that I mean by doing mortal wounds. And beyond that, you would have buff powers, things that would help cause, you have the Flickering Flames to give the +1 wound to your horrors. You got the Glamour of Tzeentch for -1 to hit against Thousand Suns. You pick a unit, this would be Magnus, this would be a great choice. And then you have the Weaver of Fates for the +1 invuln. On top of that, there's Diabolical Strength. And then there's Gaze of Fate, of course, which Gaze of Fate is a fundamental in Tzeentch armies. Heck, even armies that are focused around other gods are still throwing in Tzeentch Heralds here and there just to be able to get the Gaze of Fate. It's practically a free command point for that psyker, because for, I think, a 6 to cast, you're able to re-roll a dice by the end of the turn. So gaining that extra free re-roll is very Tzeentchian and helpful, and that's one of those powers that you definitely want to cast. So it's a whole conversation on how to divvy your powers up. And the thing that's important about the offensive powers, again, there's about 6 of them in between the 3 disciplines, is that most of them, besides 1, can target characters. So their abilities to snipe the critical characters that they put in your way. And now that you have +6 inches to the cast, most of them are up to 24-inch range. So you're really able to pick out key elements of someone's list and destroy them with mortal wounds, while removing their screen, being the closest enemy unit with the smite. Some of these powers are, we have the Bolt of Change, we have Infernal Gateway, Gift of Chaos, Infernal Gaze, and Tzeentch Firestorm. So 3 of these powers are fairly expensive. We have the Bolt of Change is 9, which can be a very good utility, as when you cast it on a unit, they can only move half range and cannot advance. So that's pretty darn effective to things that have a lot of movement, and you're doing D3 mortal wounds on top of that. But it is Warp Charge 9. This is where Ahriman comes in with his +1. You do have a Kabbalistic Focus stratagem for the Thousand Suns that can allow you to get +2 to your cast as long as you're within 6 inches of 2 other Thousand Suns psychics. So that can be extremely well, and makes it pretty damn easy to get these powers off that are high cost, because you're getting +3 to the cast in those instances. If you take Magnus, +4, and that is one of the reasons why it is pretty damn tempting to take Magnus, is for that +4 to cast on 2 particular powers. One, his Gaze of Fate, or excuse me, Gaze of Magnus, which is relative, just pretty much his smite, is already a D6 smite. But if you get above an 11, then it's going to be a 2d6 smite. So you can do up to 12 mortal wounds with 1 cast, and you get +4 to that cast, needing only an 8 to be able to knock it out. So, and on top of that, Magnus allows you to reroll 1s in the psychic phase for not just him, but all other Thousand Sun sorcerers within 9 inches. So that 1 protects you from perils of the warp for your other psykers, particularly because Magnus is already excellent at saving the perils of the warp. He gets a 2-up save to remove any mortal wounds that come from perils. On top of that reroll 1s, you can really nail the big shots. Those ones that would cripple your cast are almost nullified with the reroll. And you're pretty damn secure in being able to achieve these powers. So if not Magnus, then your Ahriman, and if not them, you still can do a +2 to the cast with a strat, pretty much securing what you need to accomplish. So I often will put the heavy, most expensive powers between Magnus and Ahriman, or just Ahriman, because again, I've taken different varieties. My second list was with Magnus, and I immediately removed it, remembering all those feelings of what it's like to have 450 points removed on turn 1, or before their effectiveness comes into play, and it's a rough time. I dislike that feeling, and so I chose to continue to max out on Smite in the early formations of the list. Going against different varieties of armies, particularly in the shooting variety, whether it's Imperial Guard or Tau, the math hammer works out that the 30 pink horrors can only get you so far, okay? And you're gonna need more than that, whether it's gonna be to split them or to even bring in more. And that was something that my mindset kind of evolved around, because for a long while I've been all about the splits. And for instance, ITC championship missions, there's the Reaper worth 2 points on a unit that's over 2. And if you only have one unit that's almost never ending, they can never score that point, it makes it very difficult for them to get the kill in the first place when your entire army is protected by this horde that never ends. And again, the shooting's incredible, you know. They just keep on giving. They even have smite when above, that's a D3 mortal wounds when you have 10 or more pink horrors. So it was all about how many reinforcements points did I need to survive the amount of shooting coming my way. And things were going fine for several playtests until I went against the most powerful Imperial Guard output of shooting that my buddy could come up with, and doing some math hammer with some Tau as well. Usually when I do math hammer with Tau, I just take the concept of 10 broadsides where you have 80 smart missiles and 80 high yield missile shots, and I'll use those profiles to test how well do I stand up to 180 shots with such high strength. And then I'll even give them you know, reroll Kalyun for rerolls. Say they have 5 marker lights for 3 ups to hit, and on top of that, they got +1 to wound. So I use all those different factors to give them the max output of shooting and see if my horde can withstand it and continue to move, and how many turns can they do that. The thing that I came to conclusion-wise is that while I enjoyed splitting for a long while, I decided that I felt like the thing that has changed over time is all the different horrors, the blues and the brims, they have the same toughness value as the pinks, but their invuln now gets worse and worse. So a blue horror has a 5-up invuln, a brimstone horror has a 6-up invuln. When you use the warp surge stratagem, then you know, crank that up to a 4-up for the blue and a 5-up for the brims. And you start to divvy these wounds out. Every time before you pull a model that's been slain, like a pink, you would put down the 2 splits. Then you pull the model, and you can even then continue to apply the wounds to the splits, to the blues and to the brims. I've found that taking those worse off invulns, you end up taking more losses, requiring more leadership that you have to check. And that you, again, more stuff dies and the points are ticking away on the reinforcement points. What usually, if you were to just take the invuln saves and pull the pink horrors with a 3-up invuln, which is your best save if you don't do the splits, you can take just about whatever army can put out. You can take 2,000 points worth of shooting into your 3-up invuln with a 6-up feel no pain utilizing the changeling I failed to mention. You can take 30 wounds will stand up with the 3-up, 6-up feel no pain. But how long can it stand up? And before I would split, because usually the happy number for me for the balance of how much reinforcement points to take was to be able to split 10 pink horrors all the way down. To do the math on that, it's pretty simple. Every pink horde that you split is 16 points. So you got 10 points for the 2 blue, 5 apiece, and then you have 6 points for the 2 brims, 3 points apiece, making 16 points for every pink you kill. So if you need to be able to split 10 pink down, that's 160 points, giving you 10 times 4 would be 40 additional wounds plus the 10 that they're killing. So you have 50 wounds they have to go through before they drop you below 20. And that's kind of mainly what you're supporting, is keeping your firepower up with that +3 shots by being 20+ models. So you support that by having 10 that can split all the way down. What I found against extremely heavy shooting is that instead of doing the split, I'll continue to take my 3-up invulns, I'll let the thing die, or hopefully get extremely lucky, because you put an icon on these units so that if you roll a 1, reality blinks and you actually get D6 pink back added to your army without reinforcement point paid. So that is awesome when that happens. Maybe it's a good shot in the dark, and instead of investing your reinforcement points into bringing that unit back, or having to split down, you just summon another one. Summon another unit of 30. 70, that's 210 points, where you had to have 160 to split all the way down. Hey, maybe you bring in like 27 or something, you start to pull a little bit from those extra that you're gonna summon in to get your points where you need to be. And the cool thing is too, that remember, if you don't need to summon them, then you still have the utility of whatever else you might want to bring. Maybe you're going to drop an Exalted Flamers to have the character rule with a 10-inch movement, I believe is 10, and you have an 18-inch weapon that's basically a las cannon and a super strong flamer, and not bad in combat either. Exalted Flamers are great characters still, and always something you can summon in for that added utility of flamer / heavy weapon gun / a character with fly. Not a bad thing to bring in. But you know, you can summon anything from the Tzeentch faction when you're in this pure kind of concept here. You could bring in some Screamers if you wanted to. You could bring in a Herald and get some more smite. There's options. If you see that you're not going to need to do all these splits, 50 additional wounds, because oftentimes people will get tired of shooting at them. They're like, it's not worth it. Not that they have a ton of more options, but you know, they'll look, you can, you know, they're gonna try to shoot your brimstones that fill up the rest of your battalion on the sides. They're gonna try to do whatever they can to avoid wasting shots, at least how it feels, because when you crank those 3-up, 6-ups for multiple times over and your horde barely moves, or when you split too and they still see 25 pinks there and they've, you know, they may have killed, let's see, 5 times 5, 25 models, but there's still just a huge horde of pink there that are almost seem untouchable, they start to get a little demoralized. So I found that summoning more in was great because you save the points, you roll on your reality blinks for the icon, and you get your full squad back, able to be buffed some more and invest that second round a little bit later into the game, so you're not cracking all your command points off right off the beginning on that first unit there. However, going against the extreme shooting of the Imperial Guard, I've had my pink horrors be removed from the board. Yes, 30 of them with a 3-up invuln and plus 2 units of brim, they can get you there. They can survive that round, that first turn shooting. But the question is, once you summon the second one, can you then survive again and get to where you need to be? It's all about that delivery system, right? Well, the trick is that if you don't go first in the instance that you're going against this heavy shooting from the Imperial Guard, and again, we're trying to mitigate the issue of whether you go first or second, who you don't want to care. But if you don't go first, even if you don't have a Lord of War and they're going to target and they're only going to focus fire into your horrors there, one, they're going to get to use, you know, the negative about having this one big blob that's going to be targeted like this is that they're going to pour all their strats into it, they're going to pour their marker lights into it, whatever, and buff their army as much as possible to blow this thing off the board. You can survive with a 3-up, 6-up with your 30 pink horrors. You can make it through there, and you still got your 2 brimstones to boot to give you additional 20 wounds to back you up before they get to your screen. The whole thing that matters here is surviving that turn 1, bringing in another screen, and being able to continue to deliver yourself up the board. There's some challenges to this, okay? So one is that with the new FAQ, you're not able to, on turn 1, come in after the games begin outside of your deployment zone. So if you summon, you have to bring them into your deployment zone on turn 1. So you need your screen to be able to survive turn 1, and if they do so that you can move forward, you don't want to have to summon until turn 2. If they kill through your horrors on the first turn and you have to summon to keep yourself protected, you just got landlocked to the line. Luckily you got 24 inches, but when you're playing against something like Guard and Tau, they can stay at that 30-inch mark plus and be able to cause quite a bit of damage from a distance. And if they lock you into place, you're already in big trouble. So this almost requires you to go first so that you can get a big movement and, you know, get in hiding, take line of sight blocking, do what you got to do, get the buffs going on. In whatever format you can there, do some damage, take out some things with some smite. You need that first turn forward momentum so that once they kill the screen, that at least you have another turn to be in front of their face before they get to shoot at you again. And even then, it's a chance. The fact is that extreme shooting can remove the horrors. The summoning, being landlocked in the back, or even just midfield is still going to get removed, isn't enough. If your screen goes away in 2 turns, then it's not really. You need 3 turns minimum to be able to get where you need to go safely and be able to do the appropriate amount of damage with your smites. So as much as it pained me, and after many different options going between using different varieties of reinforcement points and smite set going down from 12 to 11 to 9 characters to single battalions to double battalions, trying to figure out that happy combo of reinforcements and whatnot, against the majority of things, you really don't need more than 30 pink and 10 to split, giving you additional, you know, counting as 50 wounds before you're below 20. That's pretty much fine, which equals a total of about 70 wounds altogether they have to go through to get through the screen, plus your 20 from the 2 brimstone squads in your battalion. That's usually fine. But if you go against heavy shooting, they can win. They can remove you, and they can get to your characters. If your characters are gotten to, you're in big trouble. Some other things that can hurt the character rule, of course, there's snipers, and then there is some impact. There's some area damage weaponry out there that can be pretty damn devastating. For instance, you don't want to find yourself doing a Perils of the Warp, them doing the demonic possession stratagem where you take 2d3 mortal wounds, kill yourself, suck a bunch of characters into the warp from the Perils death, for instance. Or the Necrons now with a bunch of bolts can come in and drop a bunch of area damage that you don't want to be centered in. There's orbital bombardment, and several different factions have different ways of doing that. Granted, that's not, you know, it's a 5-up on characters most often to land a mortal wound on each of these, or you need a 6 to begin with on each individual unit. So it's not like it's that devastating, but you got to be careful with your clumping up. There is countermeasures. And then of course, don't forget the Collectus Assassin, I feel like is critical with this being a part of the meta now. You know, in a big way, I believe you definitely want your Collectus Assassins, if you're Imperium players, to be able to protect yourself or help mitigate the amount of control the other player has in the psychic phase. So before I, you know, one of the evolutions of thought that I was like, okay, maybe against most armies, instead of, what I didn't like about putting the 30 pink on the board at first is, again, you're taking those first turn shots, you're lessening the shooting that they'll have as they have pink horrors removed, and you're also having to keep them alive by paying the 2 command points to give them +1 invuln, by paying 2 command points to potentially not take a morale check, etc. There's a lot of investment that goes into them by surviving on the first turn. So I thought, what if you didn't have to take that suffering and you brought them in post? For instance, so the goal was to take as inexpensive a troop slot as possible as a screen, so that I could spend the points that I didn't do by putting them on the board directly to bring them in post. And this would be my attempt to do with 30 brimstones and 2 squads of 10. I was hoping that 50 wounds would be enough to keep me around, to be able to bring them in mid-game, as far as the pinks, and take the shooting without having to take any suffering prior to that. But it's definitely not the case. Again, when you go against heavy shooting, the 6-up invuln with the 6-up Villain of Pain, even if it is 50 wounds, is not able to withstand the amount of bullets that can come your way. They say that 8th edition is the edition of glory to the bullets, and there is plenty of it out there. And when you have a big horde, it's not like there's a ton of ways to totally stay out of line of sight anyway. So, and not to mention the amount of line of sight not required by the mortars that are out there, the wyverns. There's a ton of things that don't even need line of sight to be able to wreck you. So that was not enough. You can see a version of that there. It was going to be to have majority of my screen coming in with reinforcement points. Again, this was a little bit before I even considered the fact that summoning, you can't do it past your deployment zone on turn 1. So that wasn't viable. It quickly got destroyed. I immediately played a second game with pink horrors against the crazy Imperial Guard shooting. It survived, but because I didn't go first, I didn't move up the board fast enough with the summoning in my deployment zone. It held me still. It still wasn't enough. So almost was there a feeling like this isn't going to be viable, that shooting is king, and if I can't get it delivered there, that I need a more versatile situation here. This isn't cutting it. Usually in my road to evolution of thought and optimization, at first it always starts out with a bunch of command points and the rule of cool, like what looks sweet, what looks fun, what gives me a bunch of utility, what lets me use as much combos as possible with inside of a singular kind of faction, Thousand Sons Demons, but at least being Tzeentch, right? What feels like it belongs together. The more that I continue to optimize and evolve thought, oftentimes it involves ripping the band-aid off and breaking the rule of cool and starting to intermix things that you may not see or would not naturally end up with each other in the 40k universe. For instance, mixed detachments of different legions of chaos and different demons, pantheons that they put their faith within, right? The lists that I were creating had many solutions to many things, but the matchup, because you're always trying to mitigate the rock, paper, scissors. I don't want there to be a rock to smash my scissors kind of thing in as much as I can help it, including I don't want turn 1 to decide the game for me. So those are the things that are factors in the kind of the security in the list. Is it viable? The problem was all the shooting. and being able to, even with great saves, and I didn't want to just count on luck and good dice rolls to get me there. So how can I mitigate the shooting that's coming my way? -1s to hit is the answer. First concept, well, there was a debate between, this was the recent change as we play tested the options here, but the idea is that you want -1 to hit on turn 1. Oftentimes the guard and the Tau, you know, they're 4-up ballistic skills on a lot of their high output shots, and making them a 5-up or even taking them from a 3-up to a 4-up can be enough to help the situation. So the first idea was that I wanted to take Alpha Legion Cultists. I didn't have very many Cultists. I technically only have exactly 40. So due to a limited model count, that was part of the hesitation in going this route. But once I, kind of came up with, I could just simply take a patrol detachment, then I would be able to take these Alpha Legion Cultists in a single squad of 40 and not have to pay any additional taxes or have the models to fill those force orgs that I'm not filling up. Granted, no CP, but again, it's all about not lusting over the CP, taking the most effectiveness and using the stratagems that are most critical to your army's execution, okay? So Alpha Legion Cultists, they have -1 to hit when over 12 inches. Plus, you can use the forward operative stratagem and really get a nice forward momentum. They have rapid fire shots that also have abilities to give +1 to wound on top with a stratagem. And on top of that, they have the Tided Traders, where once per game you can remove them from the board and bring them back in full strength. So if your enemy doesn't kill the entire unit, then you can replenish them back to full and get free points. Free points is always a strong factor when that is in play, and that is something I definitely was intrigued to utilize. The debate came then, so the concept, after going against that heavy shooting, it was all about you need double screens. You need 2 big squads to be able to protect you all the way up. You need that security system. Squad 1 gets you to turn 2, Squad 2 comes in, turn 2 beyond, to give you the midfield support late game and keep you totally safe and rocking face. So the first idea was to have, I went to Plaguebearers first, and by default they have -1 to hit when they're over 20+ models. So you take a 30-man blob of Plaguebearers, giving them -1 to hit naturally for their Cloud of Flies ability. And then on top of that, you have Miasma Pestilence that you can cast on them, making them -2 to hit. Of course, that's after you go. So if they go first, then you're not going to have the -2, but you have a 5-up invuln with a 5-up Disgustingly Resilient save, and on top of that, you can drop the Warp Surge stratagem and give them a 4-up invuln save going into the 5-up Field Obtain, and on top of that, you can even do stratagem to give them reroll 1s on their Disgustingly Resilient. So you can make them extremely survivable. They got the -1 to hit right out the gates. They're toughness 4 versus toughness 3 in the Horrors. Overall, a better investment. The thing that's also fantastic about the Plaguebearers is they have some amazing buffs you can offer them with some Nurgle demon characters. This would be Sloppity Bilepiper and the Spoilpox Scrivener. Unfortunately, they're not psykers, but they are still extremely affordable at like 60 and 75 points. With these Nurgle demon characters, we're able to give +2 to the movement, we're able to get +1 to the hit roll, we're able to get roll 2d6 and drop the highest for your morale check, and you paired with the demonic icon can get reality blink that much easier by nailing the 1. If you take a Poxbringer, you can get +1 strength, and with a demon prince you can get reroll 1. So you can buff them like crazy, and that's not even talking about using the strats that you can apply to them and the psychic powers. So they're a great screen, but you end up spending about 130 some points to buff them with those 2 characters there that I was mentioning. So the idea was, what if I could take, for cheaper, the most cost-effective screen to get that comes with a -1 default is the Alpha Legion Cultists. Not to mention their added utility. Then the question becomes, do I care about the -2, or would I rather take Slaanesh, go with my -1, and then get the ability to do Feel No Pain with your Delightful Agonies Slaanesh Psychic Power for the Chaos Space Marines, or Heretic Astartes. On top of that, you also can use a stratagem to something Cacophony to allow them to shoot twice. So you gain more offensive ability by taking Slaanesh Alpha Legion Cultists, and that ended up being my decision in the next process that I created. I like the idea of not having to pay for those Nurgle characters and bringing those guys in the later game, and kind of using that as a more of a screen and less of an offensive force, because I have the offensive power of the shooting and close combat of the cultists. So the idea was, by saving those points, that gave me, I could just summon in a 30 squad of Plaguebearers and be able to save those points on the buffs, because I wouldn't need that 7-inch move as much as I'd be bringing them in midfield late game. By also bringing in Nurgles into the list, you're able to then easily bring in some Nurgling, and Nurgling are fantastic troop slots. They count, each base has 4 wounds apiece. They got a 5-up Invuln with a 5-up Disgusting or Resilient against weapons that don't have a damage characteristic more than 1. So they're great, and on top of that, they can infiltrate outside of 9 inches of the enemy deployment zone when you deploy them. So you can get yourself on all the objectives. You can easily get the 4 table quarters of the board. You know, it's they're very, and by putting yourself in these forward positions, they're also in front of your characters, well within hiding often, and can only be targeted by things that don't need line of sight, and can be that forward unit that stops them from targeting your characters even once your screen's removed. So I loved the Nurgling hiding and infiltrating, including with the cultists, and I think that it's very effective against the majority of what you can play, and be extremely hard for most people to deal with. However, I don't think it's enough. It can still be removed. It's basically, it's not safe. If they can be removed, then you are potentially going to die. And I made the decision that, as much as it is highly effective in most cases, to mitigate and to take the most secure route, I eliminated the cultists, went back to just a battalion and supreme command detachment to remove as much tax of the Force Orgs as possible, and take a Demon Prince of Nurgle and the 2 Nurgle characters to give all the buffs to themselves, with enough reinforcement points to drop in another squad of 30 once the first one is passed away. That, I feel, is the most survivable thing that you can take. If you do get to go first, then you're going to be able to give them a -2 to hit, and that pretty much nullifies any heavy shooty army. Most of the guys with the heavy shots in mass are going to be 4s to hit, going up to 6s, and if anything, they're going to 5s. And that pretty much takes care of you, especially when you drop the Warp Surge and get a 4-up Invuln with a 5-up Feeling of Pain, and hell, if you need it, reroll 1s. That is the method of delivery and kind of where this video has led. I wanted to kind of pass on that tech. Beyond that, Magnus has became a deciding, for a good hot sec, he's going to be in the army. He adds too much utility with that reroll 1s. It can be so clutch on your psychic to really nail those big bomb powers, especially with him himself. Taking those big expensive powers, whether it's Doombolt, you know, even Death Hex, Warp Time. Those aren't too bad. Warp Time being 6, but Death Hex is 8. And usually when you want it to go off, you really want it to go off. Keep in mind, though, that even if you don't take the right power selection as you might need it, or somebody needs something at a particular time, at any point, if you got the command points available, you can swap powers out. Additionally, you can swap powers and then cast an extra power. These are all strats that cost 1 apiece, but you can switch your powers around on both your demons and your Heretic Astartes, Thousand Suns, and then you can also cast an additional power by using stratagems. So when you need the right power for the job, if you haven't pre-selected it in the right way, then you are ready to go by just using some strats. Again, I use Ahriman and Magnus to take care of the most expensive offensive powers, which there's a total of 6 between the 3 disciplines of Change, Tzeentch, and the Heretic Astartes disciplines. And then I will, on the Demon Princes, you know that you're going to want to smite, so then it's a secondary power beyond that. And the secondary power for me is usually the buff power. You're going to have your Gaze of Fate, your Weaver of Fates, and your Glamour of Tzeentch, and then you have your Boon of Change as well. That gives you your reroll. So I spread out. I put most of the offense on. I'll put Warp Time on Magnus because he independently, he has a 16-inch move. Warp Time himself gave me another 16 inches. He got 32 inches on this guy. He's going to separate himself from the rest of the horde, especially that he's not protected anyways from that by the screen. And so you want to be able to continue to just jump him around to all the primary targets by Warp Time, Warp Time. He has that as an auxiliary power because he knows 3 and can cast 3 on top of having smite. So you have 4 powers and can only cast 3. So I use warp time as my auxiliary power. If I want to get all my offense plus that off, then I'll drop the strat to cast an additional. If I need to somehow give him Death Hex in the moment, I can switch it that way, for instance. And then Ahriman's rocking the Death Hex. You know, with his 12-inch move, he's kind of the backup to Magnus, cruising around behind him and Death Hexing when he might need to, as well as having a Demon Prince ready with the temporal manipulation to be able to give Magnus wounds back. So then, you know, so pretty much I'm ready to smite and then do a buff power with the Demon Princes. Additionally, I will double up on the offensive powers that Magnus has, being that he's likely to be destroyed, and be able to still have those offensive psychic powers that can target characters in mid-game with my Demon Princes. And then they may choose, since they're not buffing Magnus any longer, maybe they won't do their buff powers and do their secondary offensive power, or in the time is right, I'll skip a buff power anyways and just go with offense, right? So you want to be able to make sure you spread those powers correctly. If you put all your eggs in one basket, then you're going to lose powers. And if you don't spread out the buff powers accurately, then you're going to have some psykers that do no offense and do just buffing. So I spread that out evenly amongst the psykers so that they're all being able to do offense and do buffs when required. Also keep in mind, you know, another piece of tech there is that, for instance, Ahriman, one of the great powers that you want the +2 to cast on is Infernal Gateway. It's extremely powerful. It can only target the nearest enemy, but the unit that it targets, all other units within 3 inches must suffer D3 mortal wounds along with the target. Now, if you roll above a 12 on the cast, or a 12 or above, then it becomes D6 mortal wounds. If you're adding with Magnus +4 with the stratagem to his cast, now on an 8, you're nailing this Infernal Gateway and doing massive area damage. D6 to all units within 3. If you got a big clump of characters, all those characters are taking D6 mortal wounds. This can wreck things. But something that's very important to keep in mind is you want to, by default, if you're not taking Magnus, you want to put this on Ahriman, because Ahriman has the +1 to cast. However, he does not have access to the Tzeentch discipline, only the discipline of change and the Heretic Astartes. But you're still not, so this means that you have to put Infernal Gateway on demons because they have access to the Tzeentch discipline. So luckily Magnus has that ability, so he can help you get around that where Ahriman can't, and then your Demon Princes can, but your sorcerers and your Exalted Sorcerers cannot. So something to keep in mind is your list building and trying to decide where Infernal Gateway goes in your power selection. However, one thing that's neat about the stratagem that allows you to take an additional or swap a power is that you can actually pull from the Tzeentch discipline even if you didn't originally have access to that. So that you can actually spend a command point to give Ahriman the Infernal Gateway, which is pretty cool, where otherwise you could not. So don't limit yourself, know thy rules. Okay, so we had a double battalion with a Supreme Command detachment, maxing out on Smite as much as possible, taking 11 to 12 characters, utilizing sorcerers, exalted sorcerers, and Zangor shamans if necessary, on top of 3 Thousand Sons Demon Princes and Ahriman, evolving into dropping a battalion with a single battalion of Supreme Command detachment and whatever else force you might want to squeeze in for an extra command point, and taking Magnus. I then dropped Magnus and took more Smite and attempted that route, but it only equates to a couple more Smites or a couple more Demon Princes. And the thing is about, you know, people face against Demon Princes, they have answers or they have things that kind of equal them, but Magnus is a step above. He goes that Gilliman route where it's just like, it's a Primarch type, it's just Primarch style, and if they don't have a Primarch level model in their army or units, then they're going to have a tough time. And if they didn't bring the appropriate things to deal with that level of strength, then they're gonna have a hard time. So I eventually was convinced of the power of having Magnus in the list, especially with the reroll ones on the psychic test, especially with the +2 on the cast. It puts a little bit more of a gamble in there and shoots for turn 1, but the added target priority with the screen adds that much more survivability to the screen, puts that much more pressure on, and it can overcome when you're mirroring up against equally strong close combat, especially with the output of mortal wounds that can drop with his D6 or double D6 Gaze of Magnus and the Infernal Gateway potency. He can really drop a lot of mortal wounds. it eventually led to, then I'm gonna take a patrol detachment of Chaos Space Marines with a Slaanesh Sorcerer and a Slaanesh Cultist unit, so that I get my 5-up Feel No Pain, my -1 to hit with Alpha Legion, my 2 powers from the Sorcerer, being able to do my Delightful Agonies and an additional power. And then it would be a Demon Battalion and a Supreme Command Detachment for 1,000 Suns. This gave you 3 different books to pull from for stratagems, and of course you have 3 different disciplines to choose from as well. A ton of utility to be able to pick and choose what you need in the given moment. All of my lists have 180 plus points of reinforcement points to have the backup utility of what you might need at the right time. I found that the Slaanesh Cultists, or even taking the Nurgle Cultists, you cannot hope for going second and being able to buff the unit after the fact. If they go first and remove or pretty much decapitate the screen, then you are fighting an uphill battle from that point, and you need to be able to mitigate that first turn loss. The Alpha Legion cultists were not enough for me. Maybe if you took multiple units of them, but then you have to start taking multiple morale checks potentially. It starts to become difficult to maintain. And I'd love to hear from you guys on some of your opinions on what might be some alternative screens or amount of, whether it's cultists or double pink horror squads on the board, or doing the summoning / drop one in, drop one in after the fact. That's the kind of concepts that are cool I'd love to hear from you on. I've found though that the Plaguebearers on the board is crucial, and not 2 on the board, but to summon in. This means that the Plaguebearers / with your Nurgle support need to give you enough wound support to be able to summon on turn 2 so that you're midfield, and you need to be able to smite away, close combat away, charge away with your Plaguebearers a central opening so that you can bring yourself into the center of the board. When you're going against heavy infiltrators, as you can see in this matchup where I went against a triple cultist Alpha Legion, they did extreme infiltrating to where I was surrounded in a corner on my turn 1 and I had to fight from that small position. I could not even summon on the first turn because there was so much of a alpha strike against me, and I was backed so far into the corner I couldn't even bring in a screen again or even move my characters to be behind the screen. I had so much output of combat and power, including Magnus being a big factor, that I was able to remove all the offense, even though they had the jump on me. He removed the screen through shooting and close combat. I had to use the +1 invuln twice over, both in shooting and in combat, to be able to withstand all the attacks that came my way. But the screen was still, the screen did what they did. They took the blunt of it, did not get into my characters, and I was able to remove all the offense and move into winning the game. So Plaguebearers are the ticket. Having another unit to summon in is the next move for me, and I think that this is the most potent combination I can come up with. Currently, the only X factor that's still in my mind I still have my hesitations about Magnus. The more I play with them, the more I believe and am confident that it's a worthwhile investment, especially if he doesn't die and you can give him the -1 to hit with the +1 invuln, plus you have the healing ability. And if he's alive, he's causing problems. And again, that second target priority beyond just your screen is tough for someone to deal with, and if they don't take the appropriate weapons, they're in big trouble. And if they're taking weapons just to kill Magnus, then they're not killing the screen, and the screen itself can win you the game. It's a giant objective secured blob that can sweep the board and get your characters into his lines, and a bunch of now 4 Demon Princes plus Ahriman are the characters that cannot be targeted. They're going to get there and they're going to wreck. So that's the move now. Is I have 4 Demon Princes. One is the Demon Prince of Nurgle that has Miasma and Pestilence. I take the 2 Nurgle characters that can give me the bonuses to the Plaguebearers. I have enough reinforcement points for 27 Plaguebearers, while I have 30 on the board starting out. We have 3 Tson Demon Princes, Magnus and Ahriman, and I think that's it. So you got 8 total characters. 5 of them are 1,000 Suns with a ton of psychic powers. We got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 powers. If you take Magnus as your warlord, then you're going to get a 4th power that you can know. Not really necessary, being that you can only cast 3, even though you could spin a strat to cast more. We are utilizing the utility of being able to, we're going to give our demons +1 invuln with the warp surge. We're going to do 2d3 mortal wounds on things that do perils. We're going to give ourselves additional powers to cast in a turn. We're going to give ourselves swapping powers when we need it. That's roughly about what's going to go down. Maybe because of the Nurgle buffed characters and the demonic icon, I probably won't be spending command points on morale checks, especially when there's a secondary unit to drop in. It all kind of depends on the scenario, I guess, at that point. So usually the move is, of course, you want to Gaze of Fate at the beginning of each turn, so you have your reroll that you can utilize for your psychic. You always then you have your command point reroll, your stratagem, plus your reroll ones in the psychic from Magnus. So that can give you quite a bit of opportunities to make sure you get your psychic powers off, or use that reroll later in the turn as well, maybe on some amount of damage or something of that nature. After you do your Gaze of Fate, you usually want to smite from anything. If you're going to smite with non-Thousand Sun units, you want to do them first, of course. If you did decide to go with horrors, you want to smite with them because they can only do a single D6. And you don't want those +1 to cast on the things that aren't Thousand Suns if you can avoid it. So you always kind of think about that first. For instance, my Demon Prince takes my Miasma, Pestilence. I'm pretty much going to do that every time, but if you go against an army without very much shooting or even much attacks that they're going to put into that squad, then you might as well smite. And you would want to do that before you do your Thousand Suns, because otherwise they're going to add +1 to your subsequent cast. The other tech is I usually take 2 relics. I've been deciding back and forth on whether this is how I want to operate with this. I like the Dark Crystal Matter. That gives you a once per game deep strike of a infantry squad or the bearer of the relic. So I put that on a Demon Prince. I like to spread out the target priority. So you have Magnus, that's a big problem. Then I'll take a Demon Prince, that's the Warlord with the 3++ invuln. You got Ahriman, that's a problem because he's Ahriman with 3 powers and 3 denies and +1 to the cast. Individually important to deal with. So now you got the Warlord, that's a 3++. You got Ahriman, you got Magnus. Then you take a Demon Prince that has the Dark Matter Crystal, so he's a priority that has a unique ability. And then I'll spend a command point to take another Gift of Chaos, another relic, and have the Helm of the Third Eye be able to give me command points on a 5+ every time the enemy uses a stratagem. So I'll take these, all of these guys are individually potent with the redeploy deep strike, the gaining the command points back, the Warlord himself with a 3++, the Ahriman with his 3 powers and +1 to cast, and then Magnus, of course, being Magnus. So all these guys are trouble, and then they have to, if they want to get to being able to deal with them, they got to take care of the screen. So everything has a problem that it causes, and with the utility of summoning, you can Swiss Army knife a situation when needed and put yourself where you need to be. Okay, so to sum it up, taking mixed attachments like this, particularly putting Nurgle and Thousand Sun Tzeentch together, is for me the winning combination to be the most effective, the most optimized, the most survivable, and the most killy. And right now, Magnus is the flux decision. I believe that he's worth it, viable, and important, and I will be bringing him, but I think that you could accomplish success without him and just using more Demon Princes, for instance, or really whatever else you want that it supplies the offense that you require. I mean, for 450 points, that's Exalted Sorcerers on Dis, that's Sorcerers, that's Zangor Shamans, that's quite a bit of more smite you could take, but the power level of his smite and other abilities and close combat and everything else usually makes up for what you're losing in the amount of that you can take. It's again all about whether that character rule security is what you want more, and it is a very powerful thing to have. But you can really lay the hurt down quickly and have an extra utility that you do not have without by taking Magnus, and including if you were to go in a mirror match where Magnus was not in the other list, that would be a big problem for that opponent. So that is my conclusions right now, guys. I would love to hear from you on what you think about the Thousand Suns backbone that I have been talking about today, the Plaguebearers screen versus the Alpha Legion cultist screen, Nurgle versus Slaanesh, taking the unmarked cultist and being able to switch it, doing the summoning versus starting on the game, on the board. Again, the negative taking 2 morale checks at once, for instance. and then being able to split their fire. Like let's say you drop a, you know, +1 invuln on one unit, then they can just target the other unit. So I'm right now, the summoning factor is definitely something I believe in. What do you think about, you know, I'm limited on my command points at 9. Do I really want to spend one to take that dark matter crystal? I think I definitely want that Helm of the Third Eye no matter what to gain some back. The command points are life. What are your favorite stratagems that you would use? I'm into the +1 invuln. I'm into being able to have extra psychic powers and to swap psychic powers. And I'm into the D3, 2 D3 mortal wounds. There's several great ones. Tell me what you think about yours. And yeah, you know, tune in to see more of what's going to go on with this concept. This could be what I end up taking to Nova, but it's probably going to be a long evolution up until that point, unless, say, the Space Wolf book drops out and I get real hyped to play that, because that would be exciting for me. And then otherwise, definitely is going to be something I take to some local tournaments soon. So I would love your help and thoughts, and I hope that this helps you and gives you thoughts. You know, I guess a question you might have is, what do you do to deal with this? And the Collectus Assassins, I think his Sisters of Silence have some great ways to negate psychic capabilities. And snipers would be another methodology, and then area damage. These are all things that can target characters. All that stuff is going to help. A screen of your own that doesn't get knocked through, something to, you know, help you take all the mortal wounds that are coming your way, about 20 plus a turn. You're gonna, you know, for instance, nurglings, rippers. Every army typically has some sort of swarm that can do a great job at soaking up those wounds. The Necrons have these scarabs. We got the rippers for the Tyranids. We got the nurglings are excellent. Just for some examples that I can think of right off the top of my head that really soak up those wounds. Oh, and for Dark Eldar, you have the Razor Wings. Those are also great wound soaks with multiple wounds per base. It's tough to try to fight psychic with psychic, and you really need ways to nullify it happening to you. So yeah, good food for thought. I'd love to see the comments blowing up on different ideas to how to deal with the list, so I can help think about that as well. And then additionally, different ways to optimize and go further. I hope you enjoy the video. I do appreciate you watching, and you know, please take advantage of the giveaway that we're giving. We're doing one every month. I think it's the 15th of each month where we're going to drop it. This time it's new in box rare out of print Vespids. Coming up next, you're going to see some more painted models, and we got some sweet stuff in line that I'm excited to show. We're on Twitch doing live tabletop simulator practice games that we do almost daily at all times of day and night. Oftentimes we're catching the people across the globe there, as we here on the East Coast are filming late at night, which is early day for some others. But I hope you check that out. The videos are post-recorded. You can check it out that way. And then, of course, on YouTube, we do our live battle reports, like the real battles, and you know, videos like this, giveaways and things of that nature. So just be involved. A lot of this conversation of the pictures of that you see that go piece by piece, army by army, and the different the conversation of me coming up with these thoughts with my group of homies from Warp Charge Gaming can be seen on the Warp Charge Gaming Facebook group, Facebook page. That is where we announce when we go live, as well as give you news about what we got going on. And in the Facebook group is where a lot of tactica is discussed. So hope to see you there. Hope for you to be a part of things. Keep taking fun seriously. Cheers.